3 concert videos, 4 songbooks, an estimated 1,500 concerts to over 500,000 people in 15 countries, and a new CD, making 16 to his credit. We have been so eager to get Winnipeg-based singer-songwriter Steve Bell to our 100 Huntley Street studio. I am a little bit emotional about this, Steve. I've been wiping my eyes like crazy. A musical career that spans 2 decades, with the most colorful start, Drumheller Prison.
Yeah.
You learned to play guitar in prison.
I did. My dad was the prison chaplain in Drumheller when I was a little boy, and that's where we went to church as kids. And the inmates would often use the chapel on Saturday afternoons to have jam sessions. And so they'd all bring the guitar, sit in a circle, and play the afternoon away. And I was so eager to play, and when the inmates heard about it, they actually approached my father and asked, they said, bring them in, we'll teach them. And so most Saturday afternoons, I'd be with Canada's most unwanted men, you know, preparing for what I do now. You know, these are the guys that invested in me back then, and really, and that shapes you. You know, when you realize the source of the learning I had back then, and the mentors I had were forgotten and well, I don't want to say marginalized, because I mean, clearly people in those situations often have a role in their situations, but who don't necessarily have a role in the wider society.
And they didn't treat you like a kid. That was one of the things that really impacted you.
Well, that was the thing. I was in that circle. This was the first group of men that treated me like a peer. And when you're 8 years old, and a grown man looks at you like another grown person, a full human being, that's a big day. You know, I remember them so fondly. You know, yeah, it was very cool.
Some other very cool musical flavors feeding in. Mom, a classical musician.
Yeah, Mom was you know, highly trained as a piano player, and she was a beautiful singer and songwriter. And she taught us to sing when we were kids. We had a family traveling gospel band, and so we would sing. Dad would go to churches, and Dad would talk about his prison ministry work. And so that was pretty much every weekend growing up. That's what we did. You know, we'd be in some church somewhere on a Sunday evening, and it was wonderful. You know, it was kind of a glue for the family, and it's just what we did right through our teen years. And
you say from Gershwin, you know, the great musicals, classics, to hymns.
Yeah.
All those flavors.
Well, you know, my mom is really, now my mom suffered a lot from anxiety disorder and depression, and she kind of fought through that when I was growing up. And one of the ways, I mean, clearly one of her ways of dealing with it was through music. And she'd, you know, we'd go to sleep at night, and Mom would sort of wait till she thought we were asleep, and then she'd sit down at the piano, and she'd play for hours. And I remember sort of drifting in and out of being bathed in these melodies, you know, of some of the great classics and some of the great pop music, and of course the hymnody for sure. But it was just it was the air, it was the environment that you breathed in my family as a kid. And I just remember you'd wake up and there'd be a melody, and you'd go to sleep and come back and there'd be another melody. And that just infuses you.
You know, some of this I didn't know, but it makes so much sense now of what might, and I'm jumping ahead just for a moment, appear to be an unlikely phenomenon in your life, and that is the symphony concerts.
Yeah.
I'm holding both the CD and a DVD, which I absolutely love. Rescued me in a place of worship frustration.
Yeah.
But that's another story we're going to tell in a minute. But you know, initially a guitar picking guy with kind of a Chet Atkins start.
Yeah.
Sitting in front of a symphony. Now we hear what's behind that.
Yeah, no, you know, when you look back, there's been a trajectory coming this way as long as I can remember. I had a dream years ago. It was after I finished playing the clubs. I played nightclubs for years, and I finally gave that up and didn't know what to do with my life. And I was driving down this highway, and I was singing a song. I forget where I was going, but it was like just a 2 or 3 hour trip. I was singing this song. And it was a pretty majestic song, and I was the only person in the car. I started to imagine an orchestra and a hall, and then somewhere in there it became much more than just an imaginative experience. I was literally in this hall, and I'm conducting an orchestra, and everything that runs through my soul, the orchestra would interpret musically.
Wow.
And so it was literally playing all my joys and my sorrows and my anxieties and my sadnesses, everything, you know, whatever came through, bam. And this orchestra would just play it, and it was so cathartic. You know, I remember I was just sort of weeping, and then all of a sudden it was like this beam of light came from behind me. It was almost like an out-of-body experience. I can see it. Hit me squarely in the shoulders, kind of flooded my body with light, and then out of my fingers flooded the orchestra, and all of a sudden it became otherworldly music. And I realized that this was no longer playing me at all.
How many years ahead of a phone call?
Well, that was 10 years. And
You had the dream, and then
yeah,
10 years later...
And then 10 years later, we get a phone call from the Winnipeg Symphony saying, we'd like to do a concert with you. Wow. And then when we did the concert, it wasn't until I'm on stage, I remember this, and I'm kind of going, oh my goodness, this is not a nowhere, you know. And I remember that dream, and then you go back and you realize the preparation of my mom, you know, and her, it was, there's a trajectory there.
And for a group of artists to contact you about something like this says so much about their valuing of what you do and how you do it. Honest story, honest song. And what's amazing too, I want people struggling with their life purpose to know that during those bar days, it's a decade of, right, playing in bars.
I played clubs for 10 years.
You just thought you were putting in time till you figured out what you were going to do with your life.
It was an abysmal time in my life. See, I grew up, my dad is a wonderful pastor. My grandparents were missionaries, all my uncles and aunts, like these are all like just wonderful people of the faith and you know, great human beings. And I didn't know what to do with myself. I didn't have that in me, and like I'm not an evangelist in the sort of the typical way that we use those words. And I didn't know what to do with myself. I started playing clubs, and it was really because I wanted to do music but didn't know how else to do it. And I really felt like a bit of a black sheep in the family, putting
going to the bar every night.
Yeah, you know. But my dad used to come and see me play. And he just says, "You're my boy. If you're there, I'm there." You know, and you know, and my mom did too. I mean, those were really good years in some ways, but they're all preparation too. You know, of just learning how to communicate with people. Also breaking down. I mean, those of us who were brought up in the evangelical church in the '60s, we had very clear lines of who's in, who's out, who's valuable, who isn't. You know, most people were seen as. And this is a generalization. You know, I'm not really wagging my finger negatively, but still there was a kind of a concept that people's value was in their potential as converts.
Right?
Not
sure.
You know, I mean, it was just kind of there. And all of a sudden you're in these bar situations or in later travels around the world, and you sort of realize, well, you know what? That's actually not true. There's just a fundamental, these are people they're God's idea.
They're all created in the image of God.
Yeah, God thought up that person.
Yeah.
You know, and for good reason. And I learned to shed some of those prejudices, you know.
Well, you got to tell who helped.
Well, Doogie, yeah, Father McDougall.
That would be Father Bob McDougall, a pioneer of this program.
Well, that guy, he was the Catholic chaplain at Stony Mountain Prison a few years after Dad was in Drumheller. So Dad was in Drumheller.
Your dad was the Protestant.
Sorry, yeah, Protestant chaplain in Stony Mountain a few years later, and Doogie, Father McDougall, was the Catholic chaplain, and he and I became really good friends. So like, and he was just like, he's my hero.
Didn't he rescue you from the bar?
He did. He rescued me from a lot of things. Like even through my teenage years, like I remember he ended up here to work with David on Huntley Street, obviously, and he would, like every time I was sort of susceptible to depression and things as a teenager and these sort of dark moods, and every time this would happen, all of a sudden I'd get a random call from Father McDougall, and he'd say, "Hey, you know, I'm sending you a ticket, come out and hang out with me for a couple of days." And we'd just walk downtown, and he'd take me to restaurants, and we'd just talk. And I mean, this is a really good story of a Catholic priest and a young boy, and there's lots of them. They just don't make news. They don't sell papers, you know. And it needs to be told, you know, because there was a man who, when I needed it, I was the only person in his life. You know what I mean? And when I'm struggling through all my things, that guy was there for me and encouraging me on my music
mentor.
and my mentor, and all my questions were okay and all my anxieties were fine.
And what did he challenge you to do?
Well, he's the guy that after I quit playing clubs, he showed up and said, "You should do a gospel album."
And I'll pay for it, he
Well,
said.
yeah, well, that's what I said. I was, well, I didn't want to, for one. It wasn't even on the radar. I was just this defeated after 10 years of playing clubs, and I didn't know what to do with myself, and I have children now, and you know, I've got no employable skills at all. If I don't do music, what am I supposed to do? And I didn't really, I've never, you know, the idea of sort of getting involved in the Christian music scene as it was then, none of that was very attractive to me, you know. And he just said, look, you need to do an album, and I'm sure you have the songs. And I remember saying, you know what, where would the money come from? And he paid for my first album.
Wow.
And then shortly after that, he took me to India and Thailand. And I've been
some places that you should write a book about. Was it
Poland?
Poland? That you showed up in Poland and nobody was expecting.
Well, you heard that story?
Yes.
That's a great story.
It is a great story.
Yeah, he got a phone call from somebody in Poland saying there's this Catholic youth conference, in Opole, Poland, and we wanted to come and speak at it. So, and then he said, well, I want to bring this musician, and so Duke and I fly over there. We get to this place, ta-da, we're here, and they go, and you are... and it turns out that the person that invited us had nothing to do with the organization.
Oh.
And so
but God rescued it somehow.
Oh,
didn't he?
yeah, it was fantastic. So we were stuck there, and the guy said, well, you can stay, but we actually had to pay and register to stay at this thing. But you know what Doogie was like. It was so effervescent, and we just started going to all the different seminars, and if there's question and answer time, he'd say something or I'd say something, and finally someone sort of realized who he was, and he got invited to give his testimony, and then someone said, well, let's hear from this young singer, and we ended up actually doing a lot. It snowballed.
Yeah.
It was a beautiful time, but it was funny.